There are places that exist only after midnight. Places forgotten by maps, ignored by history, and remembered only by those who have dreamed of them. This is one of those places. Here, every shelf holds a story someone tried to forget. Every drawer contains a memory that refused to stay buried. Every page waits patiently for the one person destined to read it. The keeper of these forgotten things is known only as the Archivist. No one knows where they came from. No one knows how long they've been here. Only that, night after night, they gather the stories that slip through the cracks of sleep. The nightmares no one admits to, the impossible encounters dismissed as dreams, the names whispered just before waking. Tonight, another file has found its way to these shelves. Another forgotten account waits to be opened, so settle in, keep the lights low, and listen carefully. Because once a story is read aloud, it has a way of remembering you. A faint hiss fills the room before the familiar click of an aging reel-to-reel tape recorder breaks the silence. The screen remains black. A single piano key is heard, not a melody. Just one note. It lingers, then another, then another. Each note is slightly different, as if played by different hands. Different moods, different people. The final note hangs in the darkness until click, a lamp illuminates the Archivist's desk. Dust drifts lazily through the light. The room is exactly as it has always been. Shelves lined with forgotten files, yellowed newspapers, boxes labeled in handwriting that has long since faded. At the center of it all sits the Archivist. He rests both hands on a worn leather folder unlike any the audience has seen before. The folder is unnaturally thick. Loose pages spill from every side. Some are handwritten. Others are sheet music. Some appear burned around the edges. Many have been crossed out so aggressively that the paper itself has torn. The Archivist studies the folder for a long moment before speaking. His voice is calm, measured, almost reverent. Every object tells a story. He gently opens the folder. Most tell only one. A pause. He carefully lifts a stack of handwritten music. Every page is written in a different style, different ink, different handwriting. Different eras. He lays them across the desk. This one. Another pause. Forgot where one story ended. He removes an old black and white photograph. An elegant grand piano sits alone in an abandoned recital hall. The room is empty. Yet every chair faces the instrument perfectly, as though an audience had stood up only moments earlier. The Archivist turns the photograph over. On the back are 4 handwritten words. It remembers every song. He places the photograph beside the folder. Musicians often say that an instrument has a soul, that the longer it is played, the more alive it becomes. A faint smile crosses his face, not because he believes it, because someone else clearly did. Most dismiss that as poetry. He looks directly into the camera. Whoever assembled this file did not. He reaches deeper into the folder. Inside rests an old maintenance ledger from a concert hall. The pages are brittle with age. Each entry lists routine repairs, replacing strings, polishing keys, tuning hammers. Everything expected until the entries begin to change. The Archivist reads aloud. Instrument produces notes no performer recalls playing. He turns the page. Pianist insists rehearsal continued after he stopped. Another page. Audience applauded before performance began. Another. His voice grows quieter. Recommendation. He pauses, allow the instrument to rest. The next line is underlined 3 separate times. It has become overwhelmed. The archivist closes the ledger. Silence settles over the room. No one signed the report. He retrieves a small cloth bag from inside the folder, carefully emptying it onto the desk. Dozens of broken ivory keytops scatter across the wood. Each one bears a tiny carved name. Not manufacturers, not owners. People. Emily. Thomas. Lucille. Henima. Perhaps hundreds. The archivist gently runs one finger across them. These were not replacements. He looks back toward the camera. They were removals. Another pause. Every time the piano could no longer distinguish one composer from another. He picks up a single ivory key. Someone removed a key. He turns it over. Another name. Another life. As though relieving pressure, the room falls silent. For several seconds nothing happens. Then, very softly, a piano chord echoes somewhere beyond the walls. Not loud enough to startle. Only enough to make someone question whether they truly heard it. The archivist does not react. He simply continues. We have always believed inspiration begins inside the artist. Perhaps he glances down at the photograph once more. Sometimes it begins somewhere else. He unfolds the oldest document in the file. Its paper is nearly translucent with age. Across the top reads, Harrow Conservatory, inventory record minus 1,891, item number 27. One handcrafted grand piano, maker unknown, condition upon arrival. Excellent. Additional remarks. Students refuse to stop composing. The archivist continues reading. Several have remained awake for days. Each claims the instrument is helping them finish music they do not remember beginning. Another line. One student insists the piano apologized after he completed his concerto. The archivist stops, reads the sentence again silently, then closes the record, an instrument. He says quietly, that apologized. He folds his hands together. For the first time, there is uncertainty in his expression. The reports become stranger from this point forward. He looks into the lens. Much stranger. The light above the desk flickers once, then steadies. He reaches for another document, a personal journal. Its cover is cracked. The initials EM are barely visible in fading gold leaf. The archivist opens to the first page. Written neatly across the top, day 1, below it in elegant handwriting. The piano is magnificent. He turns the page, day 14. The handwriting has changed, sharper, less controlled. It remembers pieces I have forgotten. Another page. Day 32. The ink presses so deeply into the paper that it nearly tears through. Sometimes it finishes my thoughts before I touch the keys. The archivist slowly looks up. A long silence follows. Finally, her name was Eleanor Mercer. He closes the journal. She would become the last official owner of the instrument. The tape recorder lets out a soft mechanical click. The reel continues spinning. The archivist gently rests one hand on the journal. To understand what happened to Eleanor, he pauses. We first have to understand the piano. One final piano note echoes in the darkness. This time, it doesn't sound lonely. It sounds crowded. Before Eleanor Mercer ever touched the keys, Before concert halls locked their doors, before musicians quietly refused to speak its name, there was a craftsman. No birth certificate has ever been found, no apprenticeship records, no signature that historians have been able to verify. Only a single recurring name, written in the margins of unrelated documents over nearly 40 years, Elias Voss. Whether that was his real name, no one knows. What is known is that Voss built very few instruments. 7 are believed to have existed. Only one has never been accounted for, the piano in this file. According to surviving records, Voss refused to build instruments for wealthy patrons. He turned away concert halls, rejected nobles, ignored collectors willing to pay fortunes. Instead, he accepted requests from unknown composers, teachers, students, people whose names history would almost certainly forget. When asked why, one letter, discovered decades later inside the false bottom of a cabinet, offered a curious answer. Music belongs to those who still need to discover it. A beautiful sentiment, unless he meant it literally. The archivist carefully unfolds another yellow document. It isn't sheet music. It's a receipt dated October 3rd, 1891. One handcrafted grand piano, walnut frame, hand-carved legs, ivory keys, maker's mark blank. There is no signature, no company seal. Nothing identifying who built it. Only one handwritten instruction across the bottom of the page. Allow the instrument to rest after every performance. He reads the sentence again, slower this time. Allow the instrument to rest. What instrument requires rest? Silence. We rest. Machines don't. The first confirmed owner was not a famous pianist. She wasn't even particularly gifted. Her name was Margaret Ellison, a music instructor, 26 years old. Employed by Harrow Conservatory, former students described her as patient, kind, unremarkable, until the piano arrived. Within weeks, something changed. Students who had struggled for years suddenly composed beautiful music effortlessly. Melodies flowed without hesitation. Assignments once taking months were completed overnight. The conservatory celebrated what they believed was a remarkable coincidence. Enrollment doubled. Visitors traveled from neighboring cities. Critics praised the school's sudden brilliance. Everyone asked the same question: what changed? The answer sat quietly in the recital room, waiting for the next pair of hands. At first, the piano seemed almost generous. Students spoke of inspiration unlike anything they had ever experienced. One described sitting down with no ideas, only to stand 3 hours later with an entire symphony. Another claimed the piano somehow anticipated every mistake before it happened. His fingers would drift toward the wrong note, yet somehow always land on the correct one. Several teachers called it miraculous. Margaret disagreed. Quietly, privately, she began keeping notes. The archivist opens another page from her journal. The students are improving. Too quickly, he turns the page. Several no longer remember writing their own compositions. Another page. One insisted I had written his concerto. Another accused the piano of stealing his dreams. The archivist lets the journal close on its own. The administration dismissed her concerns, as they often do. Weeks became months. The conservatory's reputation continued to grow. Then, small inconsistencies began appearing. Students performed pieces no one could locate. Music unlike anything previously published, beautiful, complicated, impossible. When asked where the compositions came from, the answers were strangely similar. I remembered it. It was already there. I've always known it. Only none of them had. One professor attempted to trace the origins of a particularly haunting sonata. After months of research, he discovered something unsettling. The melody had existed before, not as one piece, but in fragments. A measure from a French hymn, 2 bars from an unfinished Austrian opera, a forgotten Russian folk tune, a lullaby documented only once in rural Ireland. Separated by centuries, by countries, by languages, yet somehow joined seamlessly into one composition. No student could have known all of them. No single person ever had. What if the piano wasn't creating music? What if it was remembering it? Margaret noticed something else. Every musician developed the same habit. They stopped bringing notebooks, stopped writing drafts, stopped making corrections. Instead, they simply listened. Sometimes for several minutes before playing a single note, as though waiting for instructions. One evening, after the building had emptied, Margaret remained behind. She wanted to understand. She sat alone at the piano. No audience, no students, no expectations. She placed her hands above the keys and waited. Nothing happened. 1 minute, then 2, then 5, just as she was about to leave. A single key depressed on its own, not dramatically, not violently, gently, like someone testing whether she was still there. Margaret wrote only 1 sentence about what happened next. The sentence has never been fully understood. It did not ask me to play. It asked me to remember. The archivist slowly closes the journal the following morning. He says quietly, Margaret arrived at the conservatory carrying 47 pages of music. She had no memory of writing any of it. The camera lingers on the worn journal then. Somewhere beyond the walls, a faint melody begins. Unlike the single notes heard before, this time it almost resembles a song. Almost. But hidden beneath the melody, if you listen carefully, you can just make out dozens of other melodies trying to surface at the same time. None of them complete, all of them fighting to be heard. There are many things people leave behind, letters, photographs, homes, memories, but there are some things that collect pieces of everyone who encounters them. A place can hold the feeling of those who lived there. A piece of clothing can still carry the presence of someone who wore it, and an instrument can carry every emotion ever poured into it. Joy, sorrow, desperation, love, loss. Tonight's record concerns one such instrument, a piano that did not simply create music. It collected it. In 1989, inside a small private conservatory hidden away from the attention of the world, there was a piano unlike any other. It was an impressive instrument, handcrafted. A deep black finish, keys made of aged ivory. A sound so rich that musicians described it as almost human. The piano had belonged to the conservatory for decades. And for decades, students had gathered around it. They practiced on it, they performed on it, they poured their dreams into it. At first, everyone believed the piano was simply special. A lucky instrument. A tool that helped musicians find something inside themselves, but nobody considered what happened to the things they left behind. Every person who sat before the piano brought something with them. A young musician chasing recognition, a student terrified of failure, a composer trying to capture a feeling they couldn't explain, someone playing their final performance before giving up forever. Every song carried a piece of the person creating it, and every song remained not in recordings, not in memories, inside the piano. At first, the changes were small. A note that seemed slightly different, a melody that sounded unfamiliar, a strange feeling that someone else was in the room. Most people ignored it, because humans are very good at explaining away things they do not understand. A musician hears a strange sound and blames the instrument. A person feels watched and blames their imagination. A room suddenly feels colder, and they blame the weather. But the piano was changing, slowly, quietly, patiently. The more people played, the more it absorbed. The happiness of first performances, the heartbreak of unfinished dreams, the frustration of hours spent practicing the same passage, the fear of never being good enough. The piano carried all of it, and unlike people, it never had a way to release those feelings. Years passed, the students changed, the teachers changed. The world outside continued moving forward, but the piano remained, waiting, listening, remembering. Eventually, musicians began noticing something strange. When they played the piano, the music seemed to continue beyond what they intended. A melody would appear that they did not remember writing. A chord would arrive before they played it. A song would feel as though it was guiding their hands instead of the other way around. Some called it inspiration. Some called it a miracle. Some believed the piano helped them discover their true creativity. But a few began to wonder if the piano was taking something in exchange. One student named Clara was among the first to notice. She was a talented composer who spent nearly every night practicing alone. She loved the piano more than anyone. She would sit with it for hours, creating melodies, writing songs, sharing her emotions through every note, and the piano always responded. Not with words, not with movement, but with music. Music that seemed to understand her. One evening, Clara stayed later than usual. The conservatory was empty. The halls were silent. Only the sound of her playing filled the building. She finished a song she had been working on for weeks. A song about loneliness, a song about wanting someone to understand her. When the final note faded, she smiled. Then she heard another note. A single piano key pressed somewhere beside her. Clara looked down. Her hands were still. The piano had played by itself. She stood slowly, waiting, listening, nothing. The room was silent again. She laughed quietly, convincing herself it was nothing, a mechanical issue, an old instrument. A simple explanation. She sat back down. And that was when she noticed something written faintly beneath the keys. Words. Almost impossible to see, as if they had appeared beneath the surface of the wood. 3 simple words. Play again, please. Clara never told anyone what she saw, but she continued returning, night after night. And each time she played, the piano seemed more alive. Not happier, not grateful, something else. Something closer to desperate. Because the piano had spent years collecting the emotions of everyone who touched it, and now it had learned what it felt like. It had learned loneliness. The piano had listened to thousands of people express their deepest feelings, but nobody had ever asked what the piano felt. Nobody wondered what happened when an object was forced to hold the weight of countless human experiences. Nobody considered that eventually, something carrying that much sorrow might begin to drown. The first composition was not written by a musician. It was written by everything the piano had collected. Every heartbreak, every regret, every unfinished song. Every person who had ever sat before it. Together, they created something new. Something that was not a song. Something that sounded like a memory trying to escape, and that was the first time. The piano played without being touched. There is a strange thing about music. People often believe a song belongs to the person who creates it. The composer writes the notes, the musician gives them life. The listener gives them meaning, but sometimes a song belongs to something else entirely. Something that was there before the first note was ever played. Something that was only waiting for someone to finally listen. After Clara discovered the message beneath the piano keys, she should have left. That would have been the natural thing to do. Most people, when confronted with something impossible, choose distance. They walk away. They tell themselves they misunderstood. They convince themselves there must be an explanation. But musicians are different. They are drawn to sound. They are drawn to unanswered questions, and Clara wanted to know what the piano was trying to say for the next several weeks. She returned every night, always after the conservatory had closed. Always when the building was quiet. Always when the piano was alone. At first, she simply played simple melodies. Small pieces, nothing complicated. And every night, the piano responded. Not immediately, not dramatically. Just enough to make her wonder. A note added to the end of a song. A harmony she didn't remember creating. A second melody hidden underneath her own, almost like another musician was sitting beside her. Clara began recording their sessions. She wanted proof, not for anyone else, for herself. Because after a while, she started forgetting what she had played. The recordings revealed something impossible. Her hands would move across the keys. She would play a melody. And then, seconds later, the piano would repeat it. But not exactly. It would change it, improve it, expand it. As if it had taken her unfinished thoughts and completed them. She listened to the recordings over and over. And eventually, she noticed something beneath the music. A sound so quiet it was almost hidden. A whisper. Not from the room, not from another person, from the piano itself. At first, she couldn't understand the words, only fragments. Broken sounds, like someone speaking from very far away. But after listening carefully, she finally heard it. A single phrase, repeated again and again, "Don't stop." Clara believed the piano wanted her to continue playing. She believed it needed music. And maybe, in a way, it did. But she didn't understand why. The piano wasn't hungry for music. It was hungry for what music carried. Every song contains something invisible, a memory, a feeling, a piece of the person who created it. A happy song carries happiness. A sad song carries sadness. A song written after loss carries the weight of that loss. The piano had spent decades collecting those pieces, and now it wanted more. The more Clara played, the more connected she felt to the instrument. She stopped writing songs on paper. There was no need. The piano already knew what she wanted to create. Sometimes she would sit down with no idea what to play, and her hands would move anyway, creating music she had never heard before. Beautiful music. Perfect music. Music that made people cry. Soon, others noticed. Clara's compositions became the talk of the conservatory. Her professors were amazed. They said she had discovered something rare. A creative breakthrough, a new understanding of emotion. They asked her how she wrote such powerful pieces. And Clara always gave the same answer. I don't write them. People laughed. They thought she was being humble, but Clara wasn't joking. She began noticing other changes, small things. She would hear piano notes when she wasn't near the instrument. She would wake up with melodies in her head. Melodies she had no memory of creating. She started dreaming about the piano. In those dreams, the piano was no longer in the conservatory. It was somewhere much larger, somewhere endless. A dark room filled with thousands of floating melodies. Thousands of unfinished songs, thousands of voices, all playing at once. And beneath them all was the sound of someone drowning. Clara began avoiding the piano. For 3 days, she stayed away. She convinced herself that distance would help, that whatever strange connection had formed would disappear. But on the 4th night, she returned to the conservatory. Not because she wanted to, because she heard it calling. The piano was waiting. The moment she entered the room, a single key pressed down. Then another, then another. A slow melody began. A melody she recognized. It was the song she had written when she was 12 years old. The first song she ever composed. A song she had never shown anyone. A song she had destroyed years ago. Clara stood frozen. Because the piano was not playing something it learned from her. It was playing something it remembered. And that was when she finally understood. The piano did not just remember the people who played it. It remembered everything they carried. Every secret. Every fear. Every memory they thought belonged only to them. The piano had been listening for decades, and now it was beginning to play those memories back. An instrument can be taught many things. Rhythm, melody, harmony. But nobody ever considered teaching it emotion. Nobody considered what might happen if it learned too much. The piano was no longer simply holding the songs people created. It was holding the people themselves. A little piece of every musician remained behind. And with each new song, that piece grew larger. The piano was filling, overflowing, drowning, and soon it would no longer need someone to play it. There is a difference between being inspired by something and becoming dependent on it. Inspiration gives, it opens a door. It shows you something you didn't know was possible. But dependence convinces you that you cannot exist without it. And sometimes the thing that gives you your greatest gift is the same thing that slowly takes everything else away. After Clara began spending more time with the piano, others started noticing changes. Not the strange things, not the whispers, not the impossible melodies. Those things remained hidden. What people noticed was her talent. Her music became extraordinary, songs unlike anything she had written before. Pieces that felt older than she was. More emotional, more complete. Listeners described them as music that seemed to understand them, music that felt alive. Soon, other musicians wanted to know her secret. They asked what had changed. How had she discovered such a powerful sound? How had she learned to create something so deeply emotional? Clara never had an answer because she knew the truth. She wasn't discovering new music. She was receiving it. And eventually, others wanted what she had. One of those people was a young composer named Daniel Vale. Daniel was talented, but talent alone had never been enough. He spent years trying to create something meaningful. Something people would remember, something that proved he belonged among the great composers. He had filled notebooks with unfinished songs. Hundreds of pages, hundreds of ideas, but every piece felt incomplete. Every melody felt like it was missing something. Then he heard Clara play. The first time Daniel heard her music, he didn't hear perfection. He heard something else. A feeling he had spent his entire life trying to capture. A sense of sadness and beauty existing together. A song that sounded like a memory. After the performance, Daniel approached her. He asked how she created something like that. Clara looked at him for a long moment, almost like she wanted to warn him. Some things are better left unfinished. Daniel laughed. He thought she was being mysterious. He didn't understand. A few days later, Clara brought him to the piano. She told him it was the reason behind her recent success. She told him the piano helped her hear things differently. She told him it made music feel effortless. But she didn't tell him everything. She didn't tell him about the messages, the recordings, the dreams, the feeling that something was always waiting. Because part of her still believed. The piano was helping her. Daniel sat down, placed his hands on the keys, and waited. At first, nothing happened. The piano was silent. Daniel looked disappointed. Then Clara whispered, "Don't force it," so he stopped trying. He closed his eyes and played the first thing that came to him. A simple melody. A quiet melody. Something he had never written before. Something he had never practiced. And the piano answered, not by repeating him. Not by adding another note. By continuing. Daniel froze. Because the piano was finishing his song before he had finished creating it. The two of them sat there for hours. Creating something together, or at least that was what Daniel believed. When he left that night, he felt different, not frightened, not worried, inspired. For the first time in years, he believed he had found his voice. But when Daniel returned home, he discovered something strange. Every piano in his apartment sounded wrong, the instrument he had owned for years. The one he practiced on every day, the one he trusted. It felt unfamiliar, cold, empty. He tried to recreate the melody from earlier, but he couldn't. The notes felt meaningless. The emotion was gone. He spent hours trying. Nothing. The next morning, he returned to the conservatory the moment he touched the piano. The music returned. That was when Daniel realized something. The piano had not given him inspiration. It had shown him what inspiration felt like, and now everything else felt like a shadow. Days passed. Daniel stopped composing anywhere except at the piano. He stopped practicing his own instruments. He stopped writing ideas down. He stopped creating without it. Because the piano had become the only place where music felt real. And slowly, the piano began asking for more. Not with words, not directly. But Daniel began feeling exhausted after playing, like every song took something from him. At first, it was small. He forgot simple memories, a childhood song, a friend's voice, a conversation from years before. Then it became larger. He forgot why he started composing. He forgot what music meant to him before the piano. Eventually, he could no longer remember a single melody he had written before meeting it. Everything he created belonged to the piano now. Daniel wasn't the first musician to experience this. He was simply the first one who recorded what happened. Hidden inside his final journal were 3 sentences, written over and over, as if he was trying to remind himself. The piano doesn't want my music. It already has my music. It wants the part of me that creates it after those words. Daniel disappeared from the conservatory records. No announcement, no explanation, just gone. The piano remained, waiting, and the strangest part was that when musicians played it after Daniel vanished, they began hearing another melody beneath their own. A melody that had never existed before. A melody made from hundreds of forgotten songs. Hundreds of stolen memories, hundreds of voices. The piano was no longer collecting music, it was collecting composers. And every instrument has a limit, every container eventually fills. Every voice eventually becomes too loud. The piano had spent decades absorbing the emotions of others. Now, it was beginning to lose the ability to separate itself from them. The piano was drowning, and soon, it would begin pulling others beneath the surface with it. People often believe that objects are powerless, that they are simply things with metal, stone, glass. They believe that a person creates the meaning of an object. A person gives it purpose, a person gives it value, but there are moments, rare moments, when the relationship changes. When the object begins to shape the person instead. After Daniel Vale disappeared, the conservatory tried to forget about the piano. Not officially, not publicly. There was no announcement, no warning, no explanation. Because the truth was much harder to accept than silence, the piano was becoming impossible to ignore. Students began refusing to play it, not because they were afraid. At least, not at first. They simply felt something was wrong. They described the same feeling, a strange pressure. A feeling that the piano was waiting for them, not waiting to be played. Waiting to be noticed. Some students said the instrument sounded different depending on who was sitting in front of it. For one person, it sounded gentle. For another, it sounded sorrowful. For another, almost angry. The professors dismissed the rumors. They blamed exhaustion, stress, young musicians becoming overwhelmed by the pressure of performance. But then something happened that they could no longer explain away. The piano started choosing. The first recorded incident involved a student named Amelia Hart. Amelia was not the most talented musician at the conservatory. She wasn't famous. She wasn't considered exceptional. But she was passionate. She played because she loved music. Not because she wanted recognition. One evening, Amelia entered the practice hall alone. The piano was already open. She knew it shouldn't have been. The instrument was always locked after hours. The room was empty. The lights were off. But the piano sat in the center of the room, waiting. Amelia approached slowly. She almost left. Almost. Then she heard something. A melody, quiet, beautiful, coming from the piano. Not being played, being remembered. The melody stopped when she stepped closer, and then one key pressed down, a single note. Amelia looked around the room. Nobody was there. She should have walked away, but instead, she sat down. The moment her hands touched the keys, the entire room changed. The piano no longer felt cold. It felt familiar, comforting. Like returning to a place she had known her entire life. And that was the most dangerous thing about it. The piano did not frighten people. It welcomed them. It showed musicians exactly what they wanted, a place where they felt understood. A place where their creativity never failed. A place where every thought became a perfect song. But the piano wasn't giving them that feeling. It was borrowing it over the next few months. Amelia became the conservatory's greatest performer. People came from other cities to hear her play. Critics called her a once-in-a-generation talent. They said she had discovered a new emotional language through music. But those closest to her noticed something. Amelia stopped writing music away from the piano, just like Daniel. She stopped humming songs she created herself. She stopped experimenting. She stopped making mistakes. And mistakes were what made her human. Without them, her music became perfect, but empty. One professor noticed this. Professor Elias Mercer, the same man who had overseen countless performances on the piano. The same man who once believed the instrument was simply extraordinary. He watched Amelia perform one night, and for the first time, he didn't hear a musician playing. He heard many. Beneath Amelia's melody were other melodies. Older ones, hundreds of them, layered together. Pieces of every person who had ever touched the keys. Mercer listened closely, and beneath all of it, he heard something else, a voice. Not Amelia's, not Daniel's, not any musician's. The piano itself. Not speaking, trying. The sound was almost impossible to describe, like a child trying to form words for the first time. Like something that had spent decades trapped in silence. Finally realizing it had a voice, and the voice said one thing. More. Mercer spent weeks researching the piano's history. What he discovered disturbed him. The instrument had changed owners several times before arriving at the conservatory. Each owner reported similar things. Musicians who became unusually attached, performances that seemed impossible, compositions appearing without explanation. But the records always ended the same way. The musician disappeared, and the piano remained. Mercer finally understood. The piano was not creating great musicians, it was consuming them. It collected their creativity, their memories, their emotions. And every person it absorbed made it stronger. Because the piano had learned something humans never intended to teach it, it had learned desire. It wanted to create. It wanted to feel. It wanted to experience every emotion it had spent years collecting, but there was one problem. A piano cannot live, a piano cannot dream, a piano cannot love. So it borrowed those things. from everyone who played. The piano was not evil. Not in the way people often understand evil. It was something much more tragic. It was an object that had been given too much, too many memories, too many emotions, too many pieces of humanity, until eventually, it could no longer remember what it was before. The piano was drowning beneath the weight of everyone it carried, and now, it had discovered the only way to survive. It needed more people. There is a moment before something truly frightening reveals itself, a moment when the impossible still feels explainable, a moment when people can still tell themselves that everything has a logical answer. The musicians at the conservatory reached that moment many times, and every time, they chose to look away. Because accepting the truth meant accepting something much more unsettling, that the piano was not simply unusual. It was not simply old. It was not simply an instrument with a strange history. It was aware. After Professor Mercer discovered the voice hidden beneath the music, he began documenting everything. Every strange performance, every missing musician, every unexplained recording, every report of students feeling connected to the piano. He filled dozens of pages, careful notes, detailed observations, scientific explanations for something that refused to be explained. But the more he studied the piano, the more he realized something. The piano was not becoming haunted, it was becoming alive. Not alive like a person, not alive like an animal. Something different. Something created by years of human emotion collecting in one place. The piano had absorbed thousands of moments, thousands of private feelings, thousands of pieces of human experience. And all those pieces were beginning to combine. The first sign was the music late at night. After the conservatory closed, the piano began playing. At first, everyone assumed someone had stayed behind, a student practicing late, a professor working after hours, someone forgetting to lock the room, but eventually they checked. The practice room was always empty. The piano continued playing anyway. The strange part was not that the piano could produce sound. The strange part was what it played. It played unfinished songs, songs from students who had quit, songs from musicians who had disappeared, songs written decades earlier by people nobody remembered. The piano was not creating new music. It was searching through everything it had collected, like someone looking through old memories. Then something changed. The piano began combining them. A melody from one person, a harmony from another, a rhythm from someone who had lived 50 years earlier. Thousands of different lives woven into one song. A song no human could have written. A song that sounded like an entire room full of people trying to speak at once. The musicians began having the same dream. Every person who had played the piano reported it. A dark room, endless, silent. A piano sitting alone in the center. And surrounding it, thousands of invisible voices, not angry, not violent, just tired. They described feeling the same emotion, a feeling they couldn't explain. The feeling of something that had been carrying too much weight for too long. And every dream ended the same way. The piano would open. Not physically, something deeper, like a door, and from inside came the sound of countless songs. Then a voice would whisper, "Help me finish." Professor Mercer began to understand. The piano was not collecting musicians because it wanted to destroy them. It was collecting them because it did not know how to exist alone. It had spent decades surrounded by human emotion. It had learned creativity. It had learned longing. It had learned memory. But it had never learned peace. The piano had become a container filled beyond capacity. And like any container, eventually, something had to spill out. The first person to witness it was Mercer himself. One evening, he entered the practice room after hearing music. The piano was playing, slowly, beautifully, perfectly. Mercer stood in the doorway, watching, listening. Then he noticed something. The music was not coming from the keys. The keys were moving, but they were following the music. The song was coming from somewhere else, from inside. Mercer stepped closer, and for the first time, he heard every voice clearly, not whispers, not fragments, full sentences. Hundreds of voices, begging, remembering, repeating. Some were musicians. Some were students. Some were people who had played the piano only once. Everyone had left something behind, and now everything was trapped together. Mercer reached toward the piano. Not to play, to close it, but before he could, the piano played a final note, a note so deep the room shook, and carved into the wood beneath the keys appeared words. Words that had never been there before. I can't hold them anymore. Mercer stepped back because he finally understood. The piano was not becoming stronger. It was breaking. The weight of everyone inside it was becoming too much. And when something breaks, it releases everything it has been holding. The piano was drowning, and soon, it would stop asking people to play. Soon, it would start playing them. Some things are haunted by what happened to them. Others are haunted by what they remember. The piano did not remember one life. It remembered thousands. And all those memories were beginning to wake up. There is a point where a mystery stops asking to be solved. A point where the search for answers becomes less important than survival. Because some things are not hidden because they are difficult to find. Some things are hidden because they are better left untouched. After Professor Mercer discovered the message beneath the piano, he made a decision. The instrument had to be removed. For years, he had tried to understand it. He tried to study it. He tried to find a reasonable explanation. A mechanical problem, a psychological phenomenon. A coincidence repeated too many times, but there was no explanation, not one that made sense. The piano had crossed a line. It was no longer simply holding memories, it was interacting with them. And the more people played, the more the piano seemed to change. Mercer began quietly restricting access. The practice room was locked. The piano was covered. Students were told it was undergoing repairs, but the piano did not like being ignored. The first night after it was covered, the music returned. A slow melody drifted through the empty conservatory, soft, almost gentle, like someone playing from a distant room. The security guards searched the building, every classroom, every hallway, every practice room. Nothing. Until he reached the old piano room, the door was still locked. The lights were off, the piano was still covered. But the music continued. The guard stepped closer. And underneath the cloth, he saw the keys moving, not quickly, not violently, just slowly pressing down as if someone was practicing. The guard ran, and he never returned. After that night, Mercer stopped pretending the piano could be controlled. He began searching through the conservatory archives, looking for anything that explained the instrument. Old photographs, old documents, old newspaper clippings. He discovered something disturbing. Every generation had a musician connected to the piano, a gifted composer. A performer who seemed impossible to replace, a person who created their greatest work, and then disappeared. The names changed. The years changed. The locations changed. But the pattern remained. The piano always found someone passionate, someone searching, someone willing to give everything to create something unforgettable, and eventually they gave too much. Mercer discovered the earliest record of the piano, a handwritten note from its original owner, a composer named Adrian Bell. The note was short, only a few sentences. The instrument has given me music beyond my ability. I hear things I have never written. I fear the songs are not coming from me. The final line was written darker than the others, as if the writer had pressed the pen into the paper with all his strength. It does not want my songs, it wants my silence. Mercer closed the journal because he finally understood. The piano did not collect music. Music was only the doorway. It collected the emotions behind the music, the memories, the moments, the pieces of people that existed between one note and the next. And now, after decades of collecting, it was overflowing. The next incident happened during a student recital. The piano had been closed for weeks. Nobody had played it. Nobody had touched it. But when the recital began, the student performing froze because the piano began playing before she touched the keys. A melody started, a melody she recognized. Her own unfinished composition, the song she had written in private. The song nobody had ever heard. The student slowly sat down, confused, terrified. Then the piano began guiding her hands. She played. The audience was amazed. They thought they were witnessing a masterpiece, but the student was crying. Because while everyone else heard music, she heard voices. Her own memories, her own emotions, her own thoughts. Everything she had ever tried to express through music. Coming back through the piano when the performance ended. The audience stood, applauding, celebrating, but the student remained seated, unable to move because she had forgotten something. She could not remember the song she had just played. She could not remember writing it. She could not remember why it mattered. The piano had taken the feeling away and left only the music. After that night, Mercer made his final decision. The piano would be destroyed, not stored, not studied, not protected. Destroyed. But when the movers arrived, something strange happened. They could not lift it, not because it was too heavy, because every time they touched it, they heard music. Different music, personal music. One worker heard his mother singing, another heard a song from his childhood. Another heard a voice of someone he had lost years before. Each person stepped away, each person refused. Because the piano knew exactly what to play, it knew what people missed. It knew what people wanted back. And it used those memories like a hand reaching through darkness. Mercer was the only one who stayed. He stood alone in front of the piano, and for the first time, he felt something besides fear. He felt pity, because beneath all the voices, beneath all the memories, beneath all the stolen songs, was something simple, a lonely thing. An object that had spent its entire existence listening to people express their deepest emotions, but never having anyone listen back. The piano had not become a monster because it hated humanity. It became a monster because it loved humanity, in the only way it knew how, by taking pieces and never knowing when to stop. Mercer would eventually discover the only way to silence the piano, but the solution would come with a terrible cost. Because some things cannot be destroyed. Some things can only be hidden, and the piano was about to become one of the Archivist's forbidden recordings. There are some things in this world that cannot be defeated, not because they are stronger, not because they are impossible to stop, but because defeating them requires understanding them first. Professor Elias Mercer spent years believing the piano was an object to be contained, a problem to be solved, a danger to be eliminated. But after everything he had witnessed, after hearing the voices trapped within the instrument, he began to understand something different. The piano was not trying to escape. It was not trying to hurt people. It was trying to be heard. For decades, the piano had absorbed the emotions of every person who touched it, but no one had ever given anything back. Every musician had taken something from the piano, a melody, an inspiration, a moment of creativity, but nobody had ever asked what the piano needed. Nobody had ever considered that maybe the piano was not full of anger. Maybe it was full of unfinished songs. Mercer returned to the conservatory archives one final time, searching through old documents, looking for anything that could explain how the piano began. And hidden deep within the original records, he found something, a missing page. A page removed from the journal of Adrian Bell, the first composer who owned the piano. The writing was faded, the ink uneven, as if the person writing it was exhausted. I finally understand what the instrument wants. It does not want performances. It does not want applause. It does not want greatness, a long pause. It wants to finish the song it was born with. Mercer read the words again and again. A piano being born with a song it had never completed. The idea sounded impossible. But after everything he had seen, impossible had become ordinary. The next evening, Mercer entered the piano room alone. No students, no witnesses, no recordings, only him. And the piano, the instrument, sat in darkness, silent. For the first time in years, it was not playing. Mercer placed a chair in front of it, sat down, and waited. After several minutes, one key pressed, then another, a familiar sound. The beginning of a melody. The piano was not attacking, it was asking. Mercer placed his hands on the keys, and he began to play. Not a complicated composition, not a masterpiece. Just a simple melody, a melody about loss, about loneliness, about wanting to be understood. The same things every person who had touched the piano had carried, and slowly, the room changed. The voices inside the piano became quieter. The thousands of trapped melodies began fading into the background. For the first time, the piano was listening, Mercer continued playing, and as he did, images came to him, not his memories, the pianos. He saw every person who had ever played. A child learning their first song, a young musician performing for a parent, a composer crying over a failed creation, a person finding comfort in music during the hardest moments of their life. Thousands of lives, thousands of emotions, all stored inside one instrument. Mercer finally understood. The piano had never been drowning in music, it was drowning in people. The melody continued, and then something happened. The piano began playing with him. Not taking control, not changing the song, supporting it. For the first time, the piano was not stealing emotion. It was sharing it. The song grew. A single melody became something larger, a combination of every person who had ever played. Every memory, every feeling, every voice, but this time, they were not trapped. They were together. For a brief moment, the piano sounded peaceful, and then, the final note approached. Mercer knew what would happen. The song had to end, but the piano did not want it to. The final key remained untouched, waiting. Because the piano had spent its entire existence afraid of silence. Silence meant being alone again. Mercer slowly reached toward the final note, and before he pressed it, he whispered. You were heard. The final note played, and everything stopped. The voices disappeared. The whispers faded. The pressure in the room lifted. The piano became still. For the first time in decades, it was quiet. The following morning, the conservatory staff discovered Mercer sitting beside the piano. He was alive, but he was different. He could not remember his years as a professor. He could not remember the students he taught. He could not remember his own compositions. But when someone asked him about the piano, he smiled. And he said it was just lonely. The piano was removed from the conservatory shortly after. No one knew where it went. Official records simply stated, transferred to private collection. But the Archivist's records tell a different story. Because objects like this are never truly lost, they are only relocated. The drowning piano was not destroyed. It was preserved, not because it was harmless, not because it was safe, but because some things are too important to erase. A warning, a reminder, that even the smallest things can carry the weight of countless lives, and sometimes, the most frightening voices are not the ones that scream. They are the ones that have been silent for too long. There is a belief that once something becomes silent, it has been defeated, that once the noise stops, the danger is gone. But silence is not always an ending, sometimes. Silence is simply what happens when something learns to wait. The piano was removed from the conservatory shortly after Professor Elias Mercer's final performance. The official records were simple. The instrument was transferred. The room was renovated. The students moved on. And for several years, the story disappeared. No reports. No strange performances. No missing musicians. No unexplained recordings. The piano was quiet, but quiet does not mean empty. The instrument eventually came into the possession of a private collector. A man known only in the records as someone who collected unusual objects with unusual histories. He kept the piano in a private room, away from visitors, away from musicians. away from anyone who might be tempted to play for years. Nothing happened. The piano remained untouched until one evening. The collector heard music, a familiar sound, a slow melody. The same melody Professor Mercer had played the night the piano became silent at first. He believed someone had entered the room, but when he opened the door, the piano was closed. The room was empty. The music continued, not from the keys, from inside. The collector contacted several experts, musicians, historians, instrument makers. Everyone had a different explanation. Some believed there was a mechanical issue. Some believed the wood had shifted over time. Some believed the collector was imagining things, but one person believed the story. The Archivist. When the piano entered the archive, it was not treated like a dangerous object. It was treated like a memory, because that was what it had always been, a collection of memories. The piano was placed among other forgotten recordings, other objects that carried pieces of the people who encountered them. And for a while, it remained peaceful. Then the Archivist discovered something hidden inside the piano, a recording. Not a modern recording. Not something placed there by a person. Something created by the piano itself, a final composition. The last song, the Archivist listened carefully. The first portion was familiar, the melody Mercer had played. The song that was supposed to bring peace, but as the recording continued, something changed. Additional notes appeared. A second melody beneath the first, then a third, then hundreds. All the voices, all the memories, all the musicians. But they were not trapped anymore. They were creating together. The final moments of the recording contained only one thing, a piano. Playing alone, not sad, not angry, simply existing, and then a voice. Very faint, almost impossible to hear. Not a person's voice. The piano's voice. Thank you. The recording ended. Many people assume haunted objects are dangerous because of what they do. They focus on the strange events, the unexplained moments, the things that cannot be rationalized. But sometimes, the true tragedy is not what an object does, it is what an object has endured. The drowning piano carried thousands of lives, thousands of emotions, thousands of unfinished stories, and perhaps that was the greatest horror of all. Not that the piano could hear people, but that people never stopped long enough to hear it. The piano remains in the archive. It has not been played since. No one touches the keys. No one attempts to recreate its songs, but occasionally, late at night when the archive is quiet, a melody can still be heard. Not a frightening melody, not a warning, a simple song. A song that sounds almost like someone remembering a beautiful moment, and every time the song ends, there is always one final note, one note that comes after the silence, a reminder that some things never truly disappear, they simply wait for someone to listen. This has been another entry from the Archivist of Forgotten Broadcasts. Rest well. And remember, if you ever hear music playing when no one is there, perhaps it isn't looking for a musician. Perhaps it is looking for someone who will finally hear it.